My name is Naziha Mahira binti Bashir Ahmad and my matrix number is D202110981165. I will present about the introduction. The rate at which the average price level of a selection of goods and services in an economy rises over time is measured quantitatively as inflation. A unit of money now essentially buys less than it did in earlier periods due to the increase in the general level of prices. In other words, inflation just measures how much a currency is worth to consumers at any time. The impact of inflation on an economy can be both positive and negative at the same time. The notion behind inflation as a positive economic factor is that it can promote economic growth without seriously undermining the value of the currency if it is kept at a controlled level. The opportunity cost of retaining money rises because of inflation, and if it happens quickly enough, shortages of goods result from people stockpiling items out of fear that prices will rise in the future and discouraging investment and savings. The purchasing power of money falls with an increase in inflation, which reduces consumption and lowers gross domestic product. The commonly used indicator of the value of the finished goods and services produced by a nation over a given time is the gross domestic product (GDP). Although the GDP is the most crucial metric for capturing this economic activity, it is a poor indicator of the welfare of societies and only provides a partial picture of people's material living standards. This study set out to accomplish the following goals. First, to establish the relationship between gross domestic product (GDP) and inflation. Second, to examine the impact of inflation on food and beverage business. GDP is calculated in each nation's own currency. These estimations must be transformed into a common currency to be compared across nations. The change in prices people pay for products and services is measured by the Consumer Price Index (CPI). Since the last year, when economies emerged from COVID lockdowns, inflation has increased, forcing businesses to increase the price of their goods. This inflation also affected our business, which is the food and beverage maker Nestle Berhad, which is based in Malaysia. Our business is the most recent business to raise prices as a result of inflation, doing so by almost 5.2% in the first quarter of this year.
Hello everyone, today I will discuss about methodology. Point number 1. The content of model specification and a hypothesis of the study are very important for this section. Point number 2. Definition of model specification and a hypothesis. Model specification is an exercise for the mapping of latent variables in a theoretical model. A hypothesis is an idea which is suggested as a possible explanation for a particular situation or condition but which has not yet been proved to be correct. Point number 3. We will focus on a relationship between inflation and gross domestic product in Malaysia. Point number 4. This is the formula of model specification. Y equal F times Xi. Y equal C plus X1. And I and F equal delta 0 plus delta 1 GDP. I and F refer to inflation and GDP is referred to gross domestic product. Point number 5. This is a formula for hypothesis. H null, which is delta 1 equal 0, and H alternative, which is delta 1 not equal to 0. Point number 6. We will be use two-way difference for this analysis, which is Excel and SPSS. Point number 7. In Excel, graphic illustration have been used by transferring data into them to obtain a better overview. Point number 8. In SPSS, it is more focused on Gaussian correlation, which is to measure linear correlation between two sets of data.
This is the results of graphical illustration. The GDP value increased consistently from year to year from 1975 to 2011. The highest GDP value is shown in 2011 with the value 5.86. Meanwhile, the lowest GDP value is shown in 1975 with the value 4.77. The data also remains constant in 1980 and 1981 with the value 5405. For the inflation rate, the data shows that the highest rate was recorded in 1981 with the value 9.70. Meanwhile, the lowest rate was recorded in 1987 with the value 0.29. The data surprisingly increased from 1979 to 1981 with the value from 3.65 to 9.70, and other than that, after 1981 to 1983, the rate decreased with the huge value which is from 9.70 to 3.70. From 1993 to 1996, the rate increased and decreased with the small value, showing that the inflation rate has not changed too much. And this is the results for correlation test. A Pearson correlation was computed to determine the relationship between GDP and inflation rate. First of all, the results indicate a weak negative correlation between GDP and inflation rate. R37 equals to negative 0.209 with the p-value equals to 0.214. Since the p-value is more than 0.05, then we cannot reject the null hypothesis. In conclusion, we are not rejecting the null hypothesis that the correlation between GDP and inflation rate is zero at significance level of 0.01. Results show that they are affecting our business in a negative way. This is because a higher inflation rate will result in individuals having less money available to spend because their purchasing power has been reduced. Aside from that, it will make our cost of production of goods and services grow, which will lead to reduction in productive investment, which has the potential to bring about a downturn in the economy of the country. If these effects continue to be felt in our business, it will increase the likelihood that we may be forced to reduce our output or even shut down operations altogether. There are three alternatives that I would like to point out to step out from this economic situation. The first alternative is to keep stocks before prices from suppliers rise and also not spend the cash reserves while making a purchase. Using inventory software can be profitable because we can control both incoming and outgoing items in our business. Buying items before the price goes up can put our business in a much better competitive position than the competitors. The second alternative is we have to prioritize efficiency and productivity. This is because wages and salaries increase during inflation. We will take the time to improve the quality of our business operations and also analyze jobs and effectiveness. We will record all the business processes that we do each week so that we have records and it's easier to identify areas where we can make improvements. The last alternative is we have to focus on the cash flow. Cash flow is one of the main focuses of business in dealing with inflation. When business declines, there is a tendency to ignore certain things such as arbitrary purchases, and collections. We will make sure to keep bill payments and reports that are used to look at unpaid items and then follow up on unpaid invoices and unfinished estimates to keep our business running.
Hello, I am Siti Noleha binti Rapilin and I will present about the conclusion. So, in conclusion, the economic growth is critically depends on inflation. The rate of inflation must be moderate for developing countries. An increase in inflation of 3 to 4% is acceptable, while in developed countries, it should only be 1 to 2%. However, by rise in inflation, it also has an impact on import, export ratio, production activities, employment activities, and other things, in addition to reduced people purchasing power. Therefore, the central bank of the specific nation must effectively control the inflation rate. So, if inflation occurs, the price increase across the board. As a result, firm or company must contend with growing expenses for labor, raw supplies, rent, and even petrol. The cost of capital for a businesses rise as interest rates rise. Do fear, uncertainty, and doubt can sometimes limit investment during an inflationary period. Even international exchange rates are impacted by inflation. A country with high inflation will see a decline in the value of its currency relatively to a country with low inflation. The impact of inflation on a firm can be positive or negative. Growing price will have less of an impact on a crucial industry with little competition and great customer loyalty. But any company will have to adjust for rising expenses by raising prices, making cost reduction or restructuring. While it lowers the cost of current debt, inflation also raises the cost of borrowing money and consequently the cost of corporate expansion.